Well, for the past few days, we have been making our way through my favorite place on Earth, and that is the area of Normandy, France. Been learning a lot as well. There are a lot of places that, I've wanted to go and see here in Normandy, the dog green sector of Omaha Beach, Pegasus Bridge. But the one place that I also wanted to go, that I've never been to, is right here in a little town called Saint-Germain-de-Verville. And it's right here that everything that happened on D-Day started on June 6th, 1944. So this is Saint-Germain-de-Verville. Now, before John Howard and his British paratroopers landed at Pegasus Bridge in their Horsa-gliders, before anybody touched down on the beaches, or really before any of the main body of troops from the 101st or 82nd Airborne touched down, there were the Pathfinders. These were men of the 101st Airborne Division who were tasked with going in like right at the beginning. They were going to be the tip of the spear, I guess you could say, and their job was going to be to land behind enemy lines, set up beacons, and guide the pilots of the C-47s into the different drop zones. So Saint-Germain-de-Verville is in drop zone A. They were to guide these pilots to the right drop zone to drop off the first men who would be fighting in the Battle of Normandy. Now, on D-Day, like I said, the Pathfinders were going to be the first ones on the ground. And the first man to touch down here in Normandy was a cigar-smoking, 140-pound guy by the name of Frank Lillyman. He was part of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment. And even though there is a little bit of debate, he is credited with being the very first man to set foot on French soil on D-Day. So right now I'm looking east from the direction of Saint-Germain-de-Verville, and this is the approximate area where the Pathfinders would have touched down and set up their beacons to guide the rest of the planes in. And there's a funny story about Frank Lillyman. It said that whenever he got down, of course, they have the famous crickets that they would use to communicate with each other. And he got on the ground, heard a noise, and saw kind of like a shadow, and was getting ready to cut loose with his Tommy gun because nothing was responding to his clicker. And then, well, heard the sound of a moo. So he almost cut down a cow. A cow was almost the first casualty on D-Day. Here is one of the early monuments to the Pathfinders, and it says Reconnaissance in Notre Dame. Boy, I'm not even going to take a stab at that because my French is bad enough as it is. I don't need to publicly display it, but 6th of June 1944. And then they have another monument right here, and it says on June 6, 1944 at 0:16 a.m. 101st Airborne Division Pathfinders were the first paratroopers to jump in the name of liberty. Now that time is a little bit disputed. I read like 3 or 4 different sources, and there were 3 or 4 different times for when the Pathfinders actually landed. So anyway, the time is probably less important. What they did is really what counts. All right, so on this trip, I have been accompanied by Eric Dorr because he's been here a lot and he knows what he's talking about more than I do. And on a previous episode of History Traveler, we actually had a chance to look at some parachutes out of his museum that came right from this place.
So the parachutes we saw in Gettysburg actually came from Saint-Germain-de-Verville, which is where we are right now, in this village right here where the Pathfinders touched down. And they were recovered, as I said, in a farmhouse here, and that farmhouse is right over there. And it's just amazing. They found several items in there. I believe there was 6 reserves, and there was a T5 and a couple of canopies, and they're picked up right in this general area. And the T5 that I have is marked 502, but I don't think it was one of the Pathfinders because they pretty much camouflaged their equipment, and the one I have is not camouflaged, but it's certainly from a 502nd parachute guy who landed right in this area, and it was picked up by some locals, and the people over here collected them, and yeah, after many decades of having them in their house or their attic, they sold them. And it's just an amazing artifact to have at the Gettysburg Museum of History, a true T5 parachute that brought a paratrooper down to Earth on D-Day.
So after Lillyman touched down, he managed to link up with some of the other Pathfinders, and after looking at their maps, realized that they were about a mile off target. But they didn't have any time to waste because the rest of the airborne troops were coming right behind them. But he did notice that there was a church nearby where he dropped. That's going to be a high point, so he and the other Pathfinders started making their way to the church at Saint Germain de Verreville. Well, here is the church that Lillyman and his men made their way to. They came up to the door, knocked on it, and a priest came to the main entrance here, and I guess was a little startled that he was being awakened in the middle of the night. And one of Lillyman's men, who was a young lieutenant, could speak French, and he said, "Bonjour, Padre, you've just been liberated." He then explained what they were doing. And the Pathfinders went into this church and set up one of their Eureka beacons right in that steeple. And then afterwards they made their way back east and found an open field and then set up lights in a T formation to help guide the rest of the paratroopers in. Lillyman said that after they got the beacon set up, one of the locals alerted them that there was a 20mm anti-tank gun that was set up in one of the local farmhouses. So obviously that was going to be problematic. So they went, found the farmhouse, went in. The German who was manning that station was caught sleeping. So they took care of that situation and then returned back here in what Lillyman said was the longest minutes of his life. And at 12:40 a.m. they finally started hearing the drone of the engines of the C-47s as they were making their way to the Normandy coastline. But right here in this area is where it all started on D-Day.